So good morning, namaste and vanakkam.
Good morning, sir.
Good morning, sir.
Thank you very much. So we just wanted to adjust something because today I'm going to discuss about a very good graphical representation of operations management. Okay, and this is one of the, at least I feel it's one of the best graphical representations of the entire body of knowledge of operations management, or almost all of it, if you want to put it that way. Okay, because there are some things which will not be present in the visual representation that I will share with you. So what I will do is, of course, this contains many parts dealing with the top management, the middle, and the work management. Okay, so in some sense we're going to get back to our first discussion, but with a completely different perspective, that of operations management. And we will also discuss how maintenance management is positioned within the wider body of knowledge which we call as operations management. So if you draw Venn diagrams, it's possible for us to understand maintenance management as a correct and full subset of operations management, a full subset. Okay, although some may argue that no, there are parts of maintenance management beyond operations management. I'm not getting into those arguments, at this stage. It's not necessary. For our purposes, please consider maintenance management as a proper or a full subset of operations management. And we will see how maintenance management gets positioned within operations management conceptually, and the interactions with many other functions in operations management, as well as with the corporate strategy. Okay, so this is what we are going to discuss today. So can we go on to that graphical representation, please? I'm just talking to the team here. Yeah, thank you very much, Lakshmi. And so that's the picture. I hope all of you can view the picture. Can you confirm if you can view the picture?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Very good. Of course, you will get the picture also, don't worry. So I will be sending you the links. In fact, I've just talked to Rishabh earlier this morning, and you'll get the link for some of the early lectures. And as some progress happens, we will provide the links in due course, maybe during this week. Okay, and as I mentioned to you, we will use it for our course for now. And after the editing is done, after the full editing is done, we will publicize it to the rest of the audience. So for now, we'll keep it only within our group in this course. Okay, it's a request from us. Okay? So fine. I hope you can see the picture. Now I'm going to zoom in, and you can see the three parts on your right hand side. Correct? So you can read them also. You can see top management. Can you scroll up? You can see operations management, and then physical system. Okay, so this slide has been presented in a book on operations management by Kostas Dervitsiotis. I've come across several books on operations management, and I found this to be one of the really very good books. But it goes back to the early 80s actually. Okay, I had bought the book when I was a young assistant professor in IIM Bangalore. That's many years ago. Okay, but now we will take this up, and I'm going to focus on the top part. The top management. We can zoom in on that thing a bit. Yeah, a little more. Yeah, perfect. This is very good. Okay, so how does the work in an organization get organized? Okay? So this goes back to our early discussion, but with a different perspective. As you can see at the top on the right, you have distinctive competence. Now that corresponds to our SWOT analysis. I hope you're able to connect. Although in this representation, it's a bit limited. Are you able to connect this distinctive competence with the strengths that we had seen? We had discussed. At least do you see some of the resources reflected? At least two of them. The first one is direct technology. Of course, you must also understand that the notion of resources also developed very strongly, although people did talk about men, machines, money, materials, and blah, blah, all that stuff. This kind of a representation of resources, as we had discussed, is of more relatively recent origin. I'll put it that way. Okay. Of course, it goes back a few decades, but still, if you look at the subject of operations management and the specification of resources, we can consider it coming a little later down the line. Okay. So you can see the technology, competencies, and the skills. So which resources do skills belong to?
Human resource.
Absolutely. So human is also reflected. And then they put a catch-all bullet point there called others. Okay, now you can understand, you can place in your own mind, you can redraw this part of the diagram as distinctive strengths in terms of the resources: human resources, financial resources, technology, infrastructure and material resources, organizational and managerial resources. And of course, when you come to competencies, definitely the focus is on the human resource more than anything else. Okay, but nevertheless, you can interpret the term here with a broader meaning. Okay, the strengths of the organization. So you can redraw that part of this diagram. Please understand, this diagram belonged to the early 80s or late 70s. To come a long way. So you can sort of redraw that part. That box can be made as distinctive strengths and then express it in terms of the resources. Is that clear, please?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Okay, now we move to the left one where it's not a clear box. Can anybody tell me why the distinctive competence has been is put into a box, whereas the other one, public needs and business opportunities, is put within a line sketch, a crooked line sketch, closed line sketch? Why have?
So because we have some control over our competence, but these things are out of our control.
Okay, control may not be a perfect word, but not a bad thinking. This is not bad thinking, it's good thinking. It's more to do with our knowledge of competence. Do you agree that we can claim better confidence in our own knowledge of our competence? Is this true or not? Compared
sir.
to our
Yes, sir.
knowledge of public needs and business opportunities. Correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So now we will discuss this. Now, what are public needs and business opportunities? To what part of our discussion does this refer to? The answer is there.
Opportunities.
Opportunities, absolutely. Okay. So you can understand this part of that visual representation takes the positive aspects into account. The strengths on the one hand, referred to as competence, and the opportunities on the other hand, represented as public needs and business opportunities. Now we will discuss the left part first. That's the public needs and business opportunities. We need not go to the right part, the right hand side, because we have already had, I would say, a sufficient discussion for our course on the SWOT analysis, the strength side. Okay, but we have to discuss the left side of the diagram, public needs and business opportunities. Okay, so can you think of the reason why the author has separated the two, public needs and then business opportunities? Are you able to understand why that separation has happened?
So maybe in some public needs there is no business opportunity.
Okay, at least I'm happy that you've tried to answer that. The answer is a little different. I'll make you understand with a question. Will all public needs be transformed into, or can they be translated into business opportunities? Is it necessary that all public needs will be translated into business opportunities? Yeah?
No, sir.
Yeah, fine. Can you give an example of any public need which does not present itself as a business opportunity. It's very easy. Just think. Is there any public need which does not represent a business opportunity?
Sir, Manrega.
Pardon?
Sir, Manrega scheme.
Some?
Manrega scheme.
Manrega. Okay, indirectly there are business opportunities, but you've come very close to the answer. Can you abstract that? It's a good thinking. Can you abstract your answer?
Sir, public service type.
Absolutely. Do you guys agree that there are public needs which will be fulfilled by the government and not by business? Do you agree with that?
Yes, sir.
Sir.
Yes, sir.
There is a large part of public needs which are fulfilled by government as of now, or at least largely fulfilled by government. Let's put it that way. I use this term largely fulfilled because slowly we can observe the rise of privatization in our country. All of you know that even the Indian Railways, there is this move to privatize some small segment of the railways, correct? And you know the arguments that are going on with respect to Air India also, isn't it? There are several other what you call as services that are offered by the government to fulfill public needs, which are slowly under discussions at least to be privatized. Are you understanding? But nevertheless, there are public needs which, to the best of my knowledge, will be very far away. I mean, it will be very long before they get privatized. For instance, do you see the judicial system getting privatized anywhere in the near future in India?
No, sir.
Yeah. Do you see the criminal administration system, which is allied with the judicial system, connected directly? Do you see prisons being privatized or policing services being privatized? I'm talking of policing services. I'm not talking of security guards whom you can hire now. I'm talking of proper policing services connected with the law of the land, the Indian Penal Code and all that stuff. Do you see that being privatized in India?
No, sir.
See, Homeland Security, I mean, consisting of a lot of the work of the police, it's a far cry. Do you ever see defense being privatized, the act of defense? I'm not talking of the production of weapons, etc., or components, etc., or weapon systems. That can be privatized. In fact, in my knowledge, it is being privatized. But do you see the actual defense action operations being privatized? Probably not. I mean, not probably. It is not likely to happen at all. As of now, we have all seen some part of the public infrastructure that has been privatized already. Please look at the toll booths in all our highways, the more modern highways. They are very good examples of privatization, where the user of the infrastructure, the roads, pays a toll for gaining the right to use, the enjoyment of use. So there is privatization there. There are private ports today, PORTS, isn't it? And I believe there are even private airports today, isn't it? So there are lots of such changes in the structure of organizations, even in our country. I mentioned all this so that you are able to understand that difference between a public need and a business opportunity. And I hope you are also able to quickly identify those areas where there is a conversion of a public need into a business opportunity, of a transformation from a government service to a private service of the same service. Okay, I am sure it will be fun to make a list. It's not an assignment, just for your own understanding. Try to make a list of all those public services that are slowly becoming privatized. I can give you an example. In Chennai, the waste management systems were privatized some years ago. Okay, and earlier it was the Corporation of Chennai which arranged for the collection of waste and the disposal of waste. I mean, in landfills or incineration or whatever methods they may have had, or any recovery and recycling methods. I'm not so sure whether the government is very strong on recovery and recycling. But today, after some time, that system was discontinued, and I think the corporation started. And very recently, again, it seems that the privatization has started, at least in parts of the city that I observe. I am told that some Spanish company has been given the contract to take care of waste disposal services. And the company has also done, in my opinion, something very nice, because the company has now insisted on the citizens of Chennai to do source segregation of waste. And they have told, we will not collect the waste if source segregation is not done into dry waste and wet waste. That's a very normal thing, especially I've seen in Germany, dry and wet is quite common, dry waste and wet waste. Kitchen waste gets into wet waste, dry waste are sometimes the kind of packaging that we may have, paper, etc. Okay, so the company is insisting. So that's a case of privatization, and you can see that it presents a business opportunity for somebody, in this case the Spanish company. Okay, I'm very sure that you will witness this with many other services connected with transportation also. In fact, post-independence, a large part of or a significant part of the transportation sector has continued to remain private in India. All of you know that, even intercity transport in India, there is a lot of private enterprise there. I'm sure all of you know this, and they're really doing a fair job, but their charges are very high. And of course, when push comes to shove, and when the situation demands, they hike up the rates like mad. All this happens. Festival season, if I want to travel from, say, Chennai to Trichy or Chennai to Madurai, I have to pay through my nose. But of course, they are fairly comfortable nowadays. In fact, they even have sleeper buses. It's very interesting. So there is so much of private enterprise where the business opportunity has happened. Now, what we had discussed, if you recall, during the last 2 or 3 lectures, you will recall about the discovery of a business opportunity. You may recall the examples we talked of. Can you recall at least one example of a business opportunity being discovered by a company and then taken advantage of, or leveraged, or exploited? Can you recall any one example we discussed?
Patanjali.
Pardon?
It's a Patanjali.
Patanjali, paper boat. Do you agree? So there are several such cases where the business opportunity, Ola cabs, Oyo rooms, these are all very good examples of completely restructured business, where the entire market is changed very significantly. So now, if you have understood this part of the separation between public needs and business opportunities, that presents an interesting thing. Okay, do you see the possibility of public systems maintenance becoming privatized? Are you able to visualize public systems maintenance becoming privatized?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Any example strikes you? That strikes
Sir,
you?
the passport service.
Very good, Arvind. Excellent example. The Passport Services Kendra. You know which company runs the Passport Services Kendra?
TCS.
Yeah, Tata Consultancy Services. In fact, there was an exchange of very positive mails among my colleagues in IIT Madras hardly a week or 10 days ago, where people were praising the passport services, how smooth they have become, and how instead of a few days, they are able to come out with the passport being posted to them, and the notification of the same coming within a few hours of their entire passport renewal experience or passport gaining experience. So these are very interesting examples, of at least from the customer point of view, from the service receiver point of view, these are good examples of success stories in privatization. Okay, so these are very interesting for us. Fine. And there are many layers of privatization also. Let me give you an example of that, how the structure itself is altered. I'm sure all of you know of credit cards. Do you know there are the collection agents for these banks who go around trying to see to it that defaulters pay?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Are they employees of the bank or the specific banks? Are they employees?
No, sir.
They are not. Okay. So this is, they are agents of the bank in that sense. So that's what we call as a layering of the service itself. Now that's a part and parcel of the credit card service. So if somebody defaults, I think for a reasonable amount of time, the bank would try to follow up to collect back the money. But beyond a point in time, the collection agents will start working, and they have typical characteristics. All of us know that. Fortunately for me, I've never had a credit card because I don't believe in the concept of credit. Okay, so I don't have a credit card. I have a debit card. All right. Okay, so these are very simple things. Never take credit, never give credit is a simple policy. But well, that's very difficult to follow. So that's it. So I hope this part is clear. How the SWOT analysis guides the organization to specify its corporate strategy. Are you able to see that?
Yes, sir.
And you will also see that there is the arrow going from long-term objectives to distinct competence is a double-headed arrow. Do you agree? The arrow going from long-term objectives to distinct competence
Yes,
has
sir.
an arrowhead on both ends. Can you explain why? Can you explain why it has arrowheads on both ends? Think. You have the answer.
Because objectives linked to resources,
Very good.
like
So what happens? What happens because of that? What happens? We have
Sir, our
discussed this.
long-term objectives keeps on changing.
Well, slower than short-term objectives. The point is correct. Long-term objectives, corporate strategy could also change due to various circumstances. The environment may demand some strategy changes. Okay. So we have seen examples of that also. In fact, you guys had pointed out how the launch and the growth of Patanjali products, personal care products, would have had an impact on Hindustan Lever or Unilever and Procter and Gamble and all those guys, isn't it? So it would have had Colgate, Palmolive. They would have had to renew or review their strategies naturally, because they also have to have their market presence strong and stable and perhaps growing. So naturally that is there. Can you give a finer response to what you did now? Can you augment your response and make it a little fine-tuned? We have discussed this earlier. Will the resource?
Sir.
Yeah, go ahead, Akshay.
Sir. Yes, sir. After getting competition from Patanjali,
Yeah.
Hindustan Unilever came with the idea of Ved Shakti.
Correct. That's a good example. That's the product.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, sir.
Yeah.
So when we have resources, we
Yeah.
may have the objective. Then, if we get competition from the environment or from competitors, our strategy may change. And for changing the strategy, we may change in skills by giving training
Absolutely.
to employees.
That's exactly the
providing
argument.
final technology.
That's the argument. All I'm saying is, will we have a constant resource set or a dynamic resource set? Will our resources set be static or dynamic?
So dynamic.
Absolutely. Logically, that's correct. Our resources set will be dynamic. It will change. Okay. And it will change to a large extent based on the strategy difference. It may also change. Sometimes we also change in an ad hoc basis, but for certain long-term benefits, So even that happens, and the kind of resources you project will matter a lot. Okay. I can give you many examples of newer institutions in India, educational institutions in India. You just go and take a look at who are the members of the board of governors of those institutions, and they'll put big names. And I can tell you, given my own experience, I can tell you very often some of those board members are naam ke vaste. I know I'm being very blunt, but this is the truth as I have seen it. Okay, I mean, they lend their name, they're a big name. Will they attend meetings and really give hefty inputs? Well, I don't have evidence of that. I'm putting it very bluntly. I don't have any evidence of that. Okay, maybe they are doing it, maybe God knows. I don't know. I can't see that evidence. But that is for part and parcel. But as far as the outside world is concerned, you think, wow, ye hai board of governors mein, bada aadmi hai. You know, you can take that kind of a notion, and it gives you a mental model of that institution. Okay, so but you have to be very inquisitive. You have to find out, you have to dig deep. Just names alone don't matter. You know, what matters is what you get on the ground. That's most important. Okay, sometimes you have to be very careful. Public information that you receive about the resources of some organization or institution could be quite misleading. You have to look at on the ground what is the value addition taking place, and that's a little difficult. I hope you got this point. Okay, I know some people might get a little offended when I made this point, but that's the truth as I see it. You know, so you just lend your name. You know, sometimes they may even put Nobel Prize winners and all on the board. Come on, you mean to say really Nobel Prize winners are going to spare time for an institution like that? Well, theoretically, yes. Practically, my evidence says a big no. Okay, so that's the way the cookie crumbles, as they say. Okay, so have you got this idea of competence on the one side and public needs and business opportunities on the other? Are you clear about how they drive the organization? They begin the drive of the organization.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Very good. Now comes the other part. The corporate strategy itself is evolved from those two things. So we are strong and there's an opportunity. And what have I told you in that 4-box representation? What comes when you're strong and when there's an opportunity? What should you do? Or what should the organization do?
Exploit.
Exploit in a positive sense, leverage or exploit, correct? And that's what comes into the corporate strategy. Of course, Dervitsiotis has used the term long-term objectives to signify corporate strategy. Okay, so that can happen. Now there's another line on your left which comes down, you know, to the top part of, to the bottom part of top management. So what are the boxes that you see there? Yeah, come on. What are the boxes that you guys see in the lower part of the top management?
Sir, marketing policy and finance policy.
And there's one more.
Operations policy.
See the dashed line. The dashed line signifies the bottom part of top management and the top part of the operations management, correct? So you find marketing policy, finance policy, operations policy, and one more box jutting into the bottom part.
Forecasting.
Absolutely. Forecasting. Now, can you see a line coming down, one arrow coming down from public needs and business opportunities to the forecasting box?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
What does it say?
Economic, social, political, and technological.
Technological forecast. Okay. Now, do you agree when we are trying to forecast for an organization, after all, when we evolve a strategy, do we understand that the environment will keep on being dynamic and changing? Do we agree with that? Whether we like it or not, the environment is going to change.
Yes, sir.
The government will change, competitors will change, supply chain partners will change, isn't it? So political situation can change. There can be severe weather problems that completely change the world of business, or like this like what has happened this time, the COVID-19 pandemic. Something comes out of the blue and changes the world in a very big manner. So many things can happen. We can have a lot of confidence in our own competence. We can have a lot of confidence in our understanding of public needs and business opportunities. At the same time, we must also be sufficiently cautious to recognize that environments are dynamic. Lot of change can happen in the environment. Okay, in just a short period, a few days and a few weeks, maybe we will get the results of the assembly elections in Bihar. Already, you know, I think tomorrow or something, the campaigning is coming to a close in certain areas there. Okay, then the elections and then the results will come. Now, do you agree the results of that election can have an implication for the business organizations that deal with resources, the natural resources from Bihar? Do you agree with that? Because if there is a government change, or even if there is no government change, there could be a change in policy.
Yes, sir.
So it carries meaning for the business there. So they'll have to look out for that. That is why we have that line coming: economic, social, political, and technological forecasts. Actually, it's a little more. Incidentally, again, I want to tell you, this book by Kostas Dervitsiotis belongs to the early 80s, must have been worked on during the late 70s also. Today, we use a term called PESTEL, P-E-S-T-E-L, political, economic, social, technological, environmental or ecological, and legal, P-E-S-T-E-L. Have you understood that? P for political, E for economic, S for social, T for technological, E for environmental stroke ecological, and L for legal. So many systems can change, they are dynamic, they can change. Political systems become dynamic, they change. Economic systems become dynamic, they change. Social systems become dynamic, they change. Okay, can you talk of any major change in the social systems in India, so that you understand this? Any example strikes you of a fairly significant change in our society, say over the last 40-50 years at least? Can you talk of a very significant change? Very easy, come on.
Sir, joint families to nuclear families.
That's a good example, Akhilesh. A huge shift from joint families to nuclear families. And this is also coupled with demographic change in India. Please understand, in the case of my parents and that generation, the number of children per family used to be very large. You know, of course, my father was the only child to my grandparents. Okay, but that was not the case in many other instances. For example, my own brother-in-law, my elder sister's husband, comes from a family where there were about 8 or 9 children. Okay, so if you go back to the 1920s, 30s, or even 40s, you'll find very large families. You'll have uncles, aunts, maternal uncle, paternal aunt, maternal aunt, everybody coming in, you know, and there was a joint family system. Now, I'm not talking of the glories or otherwise of the joint family system. That's not my interest. I'm only making an observation that social systems change and they have an impact. They have an impact on decision making inside the family. You will also see the nature of advertisements that are coming on TV or even on FM radio. They are very nicely targeted. They sort of point at who is the decision maker sometimes. You know, I'll just give an example. If you see one of the detergent advertisements, you know, pour, you know what that advertisement is. I'm not naming anything, but it's very interesting because they bring a small boy and the boy's mom or somebody, you know, or maybe some neighbor, you know, and the boy says pour, you know, as though it's very easy. And you find in some of the advertisement they even glorify becoming dirty, you know, so that they can go for a nice detergent wash. So this talks of a subtle change that's happening. Very interesting and subtle change in our social structures. Okay, I'm not getting deeper into that analysis, that's not necessary, but that's major. In more recent times, have you come across any major shift which has long-term implications? May not be immediate, but long-term, but a very significant change in Indian social conditions. Yeah.
So girl child education may also.
Okay, not a bad one. Girl child education, the rise of girls in the education system, deliberate slant to promote the education of girls. I was looking at something else which has long-term implications. The girl child definitely has huge implications, you know, and today parents are less averse to have girl children, at least in certain social contexts, you know. They feel that girls could be more conducive to the relationships in the family. But anyway, those are assumptions, or they may be, those are perceptions. Anything else? What do you think is the, what do you think are going to be the implications of same-sex marriage, which is now being seriously discussed? Okay. In fact, there are degrees of freedom. I'm not talking of right and wrong. That's not my interest here. I'm only trying to point out how these could have certain long-term implications, technological implications, you know, like this. I don't forget political, economic, social, technological, pestel. There are lots of, I mean, there are huge implications because of technology. Okay, and all of you know that these happenings are interrelated. It's not that political changes are isolated from economic, social, technological, etc. And it's not that economic changes are isolated from political, technological, social, environmental, ecological, etc. That's not the thing. They're all integrated together. But we can identify the predominant nature of a change, whether it's a political change or an economic change, and so on. Okay. So for example, we do bring in this argument, you know, that demonetization that happened one fine evening. Our Prime Minister announced that the 500 rupee notes and 1000 rupee notes will no longer be valid. Now that has huge, it has a combination of political and economic, and it has had some implications, and we'll have to understand what are the implications. What would one classify as a beneficial outcome? What would one classify as an undesirable outcome, like that? So you have to do an analysis as an intellectual, you know. You can't be against or for the person. You have to do a balanced analysis and then take a stance. That is the right of an individual. Okay. So you can't just slam it, or you can't just celebrate it completely. Everything is like that. It comes in a mixed bag. Then somebody can say GST. Again, it's a combination of political and economic. Okay. And it has legal implications also. So the entire system, tax collection system, has correspondingly been formed, you know, structured to take care of GST. Okay. So like this, we have a lot of changes that happen, and these have a bearing on institutions, on organizations. I hope you agree, GST would have impacted the accounting systems and their structure in all organizations. Do you agree?
Yes, sir.
Because before GST, your accounting system would have been something. After GST, you make those changes. And of course, you have technology for that. No? Especially you have software technology to take care of those changes because of GST. So like this, these are integrated, and these have an important implication, and it is very important for the forecasting component of an organization to be sensitive to those changes. That's why you use the word forecasting. Somebody uses the word foresight. You know, are you able to have foresight about the kind of changes that are likely to happen, so that you can accordingly do changes in the company, its structure, its resources, its processes, and so on. So that's the connection. I hope you have understood that arrow coming in down to forecasting. Have you understood that?
Yes, sir.
Good. Now you can see that the forecasting immediately starts influencing marketing policy. You can see that small upward arrow to between forecasting and marketing policy, correct? Because marketing policy concerns the creation, the sustenance, the growth of the markets in which the company is operating. Because very often people do draw differences between marketing and sales. Okay, sales typically corresponds to the actual transaction that happens between the customer and the seller, the buyer and the seller, whereas marketing is has a much larger connotation. Okay, although I have come across some authors who say sales is larger, marketing is a subset. Again, I'm not getting into that argument. Okay, I can leave it to the experts. I am sharing my understanding. In my understanding, whatever I have read, whatever I've been exposed to, marketing has a larger conceptual connotation, with sales referring to the transactional aspects. Okay, marketing deals primarily with the creation, sustenance, and growth of the market. So the consolidation of markets for a company in its products and services space. Okay, so marketing policy has to come. I have already discussed the idea of a policy. Do you recall what is a policy? Anyone? I have given you examples also earlier. If you have taken notes, you should be
Sir,
able to locate them. Yeah.
It is decision about decision making.
Very good, Akash. A policy is a meta decision. It is a decision about decision making. You may recall my examples. I won't drive over 40 kilometers per hour within the city, any condition. Even on an empty road, I won't go beyond 40 kmph. So that's a policy. Agreed? So like that, we have marketing policy, operations policy, and finance policy. I'm not taking you into the subject of marketing policy here, but I want you to understand. So marketing policy refers to marketing decisions about marketing decisions. Okay, so signifying what kind of products you will work on, what kind of products you will put into the market. The policy will concern how will you distribute them, what will be the nature of relationships between the customers, the dealer distributors, and your company, and so on. There are many dimensions of marketing policy, okay, which could include even things like packaging of the product and so on. So there are so many dimensions. We are not getting into the details here. Okay, so the pestle analysis which we do from the knowledge of public needs and business opportunities and our own competencies, which lead to our forecasting what is likely to happen in the long run. So when we talk of the long run, that's also defined there. You can see one horizontal line going at the top of operations management, going left to right from forecasting to system design, correct? So that line refers to the long-term forecast. You can see that the brackets indicates anywhere between 2 to 10 years. So obviously this means that less than 2 years will be considered as medium-term forecast. Okay. That line also you can see going from the forecasting box at the bottom of the forecasting box coming into aggregate planning. Okay, so we'll have to discuss this aspect. And I would urge you to take a look at the subject of marketing policy, operations policy, and finance policy, at least at the level of general knowledge. You need not become policy specialists, but you should have some general knowledge and how those things, how forecasting information or information in the form of forecast influences marketing policy, operations policy, and finance policy, and how they have mutual influences. Why? Because a company is a well integrated structure. So it's not the case where marketing policy, operations policy, and finance policy are isolated. They are not isolated. They are well integrated. They have a dominant. For example, in marketing policy, the amount of marketing content in the knowledge and information transacted will be very high, In the finance policy, likewise, on your right, the amount of finance accounting content will be very high. In the operations policy, the amount of operations, manufacturing, logistics content will be very high, and they interact. And you can see together, all of them interact with your corporate strategy. So there is a dynamic relationship between strategy and policy, as you can notice from the diagram. And as was pointed out by you earlier in today's lecture, strategy is also dynamic. It's not that somebody sits with a strategy and say, this is our strategy independent of what happens outside. That's a pretty stupid kind of an understanding. That's not the way it happens. Strategy is also dynamic. Yeah, you could maintain certain aspects of strategy very static because of your value systems. The company has some value systems which will guide strategy. And if those value systems are held strongly, the company may say, no, these aspects of strategy we won't touch because they hit at our value system as a company. Okay, so that can happen. And I know of examples, at least in the housing sector, of a very big group of a very big building company group. I don't want to name it here. They were very successful in Chennai for many years, and they had some very, very laudable value systems with respect to their financial practices and all. In fact, the market really respected them. I know this for certain because I have too many friends who have bought flats from that company. Of course, that very value system, people today look back and say that that value system cost the company its survival. That company doesn't exist anymore. Okay, and then people go on to say, look, you can't be absolutely straight and survive in our today's market. In fact, people do say it's almost impossible to survive if your integrity is absolutely correct. So people say, look, you have to know when to bend, when to swerve, etc. in the current market, isn't it? So they do indirectly support the idea of some level of corruption. I know I'm a teacher, but unfortunately this is the truth today, as it is felt by almost every citizen of India. You can survey and find out if you wish. Okay, my hypothesis is almost all Indians who are adults and who are thinking and who are legally normal would say that, look, it's virtually impossible to survive and do your duties and get your things done without any corruption. So that's unfortunately the situation. But nevertheless, I just wanted to present this example of a company which was seen to be of very high integrity, part of their value system, but which could not survive beyond a point. But maybe that perspective is wrong, because I don't know, at least I've not come across any deep case study of what had happened about that company. Maybe there is a case. I'm ignorant. I'll raise my hands, put my hands up. I'm ignorant. But what I'm reflecting to you is an opinion held by hundreds of my friends, literally, in the city or even outside, who know of this group. So sometimes you could have strategy which is held constant because of the value system that is present in the company, which is held by the company. Okay, so accordingly, policy will also change. So the top part of the diagram, which we have discussed today about top management, I'm just abstracting it for you, consists of the SWOT analysis as a big driver of the corporate strategy, and coupled with your forecasts, the PESTEL, political, economic, social, technological, environmental, ecological, and legal part, that has a bearing on the policies of the company. And there is a close interaction between the policies and the strategy. That dynamic is at the top level. That's why we talked of that level earlier as the philosophical level, the principles level, isn't it? The purpose level, the perspectives level. Now you can understand. Do you agree the PESTEL denotes a strong part of perspectives? Do you agree?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So sometimes when you talk of long-term planning, we do talk of two types of long-term planning: perspective planning and strategic planning. Okay, and typically you will come across in the literature that companies that engage in perspective planning, which is very long-term, they talk about scenario development as a method for developing multiple scenarios using the PESTEL framework. They develop multiple scenarios and say, look, these are big changes we expect to happen, and therefore the company can safely look at these directions of growth and its own what you call journey in the corporate world. So that sums up the top management part of the operations view of a company. So please understand, operations is one view of how things happen in a company. So operations is not restricted to manufacturing or value addition alone. If you take this perspective, I want you to understand that. So there are operations aspects in strategy also. I want you to understand that. Okay. So how strategy is formulated also involves some operations aspect if you take a larger philosophical approach to understanding operations. Are we clear?
Yes, sir.
So I will stop with this for today, and tomorrow we will continue with the other part. Okay, that is the middle part, the operations management part, where you will see maintenance is placed clearly. Okay, fine. So bye. Thank you.